Hey there.
What's going on, man?
The house is a disarray.
Yeah.
We are
Still working on the construction remodel.
we are doing that, and as things go, every time that we start to get close to getting something done, Lulu's like, "Why don't we just do the floors in this room too?"
Yeah. It just keeps getting bigger.
Yeah. So now we're moving furniture from one room to another, and it's a big mess. But
Wait till she decides the furniture doesn't match. Then the drapes don't match. Then the kitchen doesn't match the living room. Yeah.
I think we're getting there.
Yeah.
So
Might as well buy a whole new dang house. Yeah.
Don't even suggest
No,
that.
is that already crossed your mind?
That is
That's already
like,
been a possibility.
Well, we looked at a couple. We are always kind of looking around for
Yeah.
different houses to see if we can get a good deal. But I just, I told her, I said, let's just settle on this for a while. The next one has to be by a beach.
There you go. Okay, fair enough. Well, anything else exciting happened this week, or just dealing with the construction stuff?
Lubu's is picking up.
Yeah?
She's starting to make some good contacts, and she's got several people following her now that have some pretty good acting and dance credentials. Their IMDb's are pretty full.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
That she's getting some recognition.
Yeah, that is exciting. So those can boots, I learned all about them. It was a fun deal.
Yeah. Well, I think in 2 years it's going to be bigger than JBK's.
You think so?
I believe it.
All right, I believe you. Well, we'll see if your prediction's right. I think it's going to take longer than 2 years to be bigger than JB Cases, but it could be maybe.
Well, it depends. A lot of the dancers are very active on social media.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the things that they do is they're constantly showing off their gear, and they're constantly showing off their clinics that they go to, and the classes that they do, and the productions they're in. A lot more than pool players. So I think that what she's selling right now has a much bigger chance to go viral in a much bigger way,
Well, that'll
and
be
be
exciting.
sustainable.
That'll be exciting. I'm Scott Hess, tax and business consultant.
I'm John Barton, small business owner. Remember the tortoise and the hare? Slow and steady wins the race.
We started Turtlesmith to help people start small businesses, providing information and resources to small business owners and entrepreneurs.
Build a solid foundation and forge your dreams.
Well, this week we're talking about licenses and permits. It's step 2 of phase 2. And in this step, you need to learn about all the licenses and permits that your business needs and make sure that you have good timelines for them. That's one of the things that'll really screw people up is they'll get ready to open their business and then they'll figure out they need a permit and it takes 8 weeks to get and they have to sit on their thumbs until they can get it. So I'm going to just give some examples of different licenses, and we'll kind of go through your business, Chester's, and the different entities that it has to deal with. But there are way too many permits and licenses, and they're different in every city and every county and every state. And so it's just impossible to give everybody like an overview of exactly what they need.
And they're not always. It feels like that these entities don't always treat people the same when it comes to the licensing or the regulations.
That would be accurate. Yeah, some people get special rules. And you as a small business owner will not get any of those. So you have to follow the letter of the law. And if you don't do everything correctly, you're going to get penalties and fines and sometimes shut down.
Well, speaking of Chester's, we had a longtime employee there.
Mm-hmm.
He had his liquor license. In Oklahoma, you have to renew every year. And the last time he went to renew, he got denied because in Oklahoma we have laws that say if you were convicted of a felony, you can't work as a bartender. You can't serve alcohol.
Which was crazy because didn't that happen a long time ago as well?
Yes, and that's the thing. If you read the letter of the law, then he is in full compliance. He has not been in any trouble in the last 5 years. He hasn't, and the actual conviction was like 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
20 years ago.
And he's had his license the whole time.
The whole time he's had his license.
They've never had a problem with him.
Never had a problem. Never been in any other trouble with the law. And the law states in order to get the license, you must have not had any issue inside of the 5 years prior to getting the license.
Yeah, and so he had no problems.
So he's had no problem for 20 years.
Just ding him on some old stuff.
And they basically said because it was a felony, and he has no way to appeal it. He has no good way to appeal it, right?
Yeah.
There's no process in place. So he has to basically hire an attorney and try to get it expunged.
Which then costs a fortune.
Yeah. So he's basically out of the industry at this point.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. The licenses are just crazy, and if you're not up to date with them, things like that happen, unfortunately. Well, the first kind of type of license we're going to talk about is professional licenses. If you're getting into a small business, you probably already have these kind of licenses, but things like contractor's license, HVAC repair, plumbing, trades have a lot of those. Or if you're a doctor or a lawyer, or if you are a CPA, you have to have proper licenses. Yeah, even if you cut hair, you have to have a cosmetic license. So if you're getting into that industry, you probably already discovered that. But there are tons of different licenses that you have to have, and you need to check with your city, your county, and your state to verify whether you need them. And of course, the federal regulations as well. There's some federal licenses that you have to hold. The best way to kind of figure out whether you need these type of licenses is just to call. Google, look online, find different industry sites. They'll tell you, or you can just ask questions. I went down to the city to check to see if I needed a general business license. Some cities require that, and we're in a small suburb of Oklahoma City, and so they have different rules than Oklahoma City does, and I have to follow the Bethany, Oklahoma rules, not the city of Oklahoma City rules. So the best way for me to find out is I went down to the city hall and I just talked to people. I asked them whether we needed certain licenses or not.
So an interesting story on that, since we're talking about the house.
Mm-hmm.
When we bought this house here, we had some plumbing that needed to be done in the old house before we could sell it to get it into shape. And I just looked in the phone book. There's a plumber right down the street from my current house here in Bethany. And I called him up. And he said, I would love to do that, except I am not licensed to practice plumbing in Midwest City.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that. I just thought, well, if you're a plumber, you should be able to practice anywhere in the state.
Yeah, which Midwest City is another suburb of Oklahoma City.
Right.
Which, that's ridiculous. Yeah, you should just be licensed to practice everywhere, but you have to get different licenses for different cities. It's wild.
Yeah.
So you also need to look into your different permits and licenses that you might need. So some common examples of business permits are like health permits, with the county if you're serving food or anything like that. Alcohol permits if you're serving alcohol. If you have any waste that you're disposing of, like especially water waste, you'll have to deal with environmental permits. In Oklahoma, depending on the type of water waste, there's like several different departments that you'll have to deal with. Department of Environmental Quality, or the I think it's the Oklahoma County Commission, something like that. FDA permits if you're doing food, and then if you have a retail shop, you typically have to get a business or a certificate of occupancy, and that's from the fire marshal. Usually that's when you go in places and you see the sign that says like 168 people can fit in this shop. And then different licenses, again, your alcohol licenses, and if you're dealing with any controlled substances, like in Oklahoma, we have a lot of medical marijuana people, so they have to get OB&DD licenses, which is the Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. And you may have to get like driving permits, CDLs. Again, there's way too many to list on the different things that you're going to need. So the best thing to do is just call or talk to people in the industry and find out exactly what all you need.
I know that I had a place in Midwest City for my case business, and it just so happened that I don't know how this would happen, but the timing was whenever I would be driving to work, I would often see the fire marshal outside of my business, and I would just keep driving.
Yeah.
And I managed to avoid that for about 6 or 7 months, but then there
Finally
came a
caught
time
up
when
with
he
you.
finally caught us open.
Yeah.
And as predicted, we weren't in compliance with the fire extinguishers and certain things, and so we had to get that done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's not usually advisable. You
I
should get
know.
all your ducks in a row beforehand. But it's actually kind of interesting right now. The fire marshal, they are backed up 2 years on inspections for marijuana grows here in Oklahoma. So people are struggling to get certificates of occupancy and stuff so that they can run their business. I think they even had to go to court recently. There was everybody's license who didn't have a certificate of occupancy had to schedule a hearing to get an extension so that they could get it.
See, now I think that's one thing where government should be, we're kind of veering into politics here, but I think that's something where government should be forced to be responsive to that. So if there's that much demand, right, then they should have to hire people and
Well, I think that's a problem again. Is only so many fire marshals can be like in existence in a certain area, and then a lot of these grows are outside the city, so it's just the state fire marshal who, up until now, had very little to do, and now all of a sudden there's 5,000 grow operations in Oklahoma. So it's just
sounds like that
it's gone wild.
That sounds like an opportunity maybe for private businesses to step up and get some government contracts to do private inspections.
It would be great, but I think the state, Oklahoma anyway, has decided they don't want to do that because then they probably make less money.
Well, I'm sure I'm sure they would figure out a way to make the business owner pay for it, and by extension, the consumer.
Probably. One of the more important ones that we want to talk about, though, is sales tax permits, and particularly the economic test, and that has just recently occurred. So if you need a sales tax permit, it all depends on whether you have what's called a nexus, and a nexus is just ties to the state that you're in. So before 2018, it used to be just a physical presence. So if you had a physical shop or a physical location, you had to charge sales tax to sales within that state. And so here in Oklahoma, if you had like a retail store that you were selling your cases out of, then you would have to have a sales tax permit. But if you were just selling online, you didn't need a sales tax permit. Well, with the expansion of online sales, Oklahoma, or with Amazon and all the big ones, there was a court case called South Dakota versus Wayfair, where they decided that the physical presence test was no longer the only thing that they were going to worry about. They were now going to have an economic test. And so if you do sales meeting the economic threshold, then you have to have a sales tax permit in that state and collect sales tax. And the economic test is different, again, in every single state.
Of course it is.
And it depends on usually two different factors, sales or number of transactions. So in Oklahoma, for example, if you sell over $100,000 worth of goods in Oklahoma in a given month, I believe, then you have to have a sales tax permit in Oklahoma. And California is like $500K for sales, and then like some states like Utah is $100K in sales or 200 separate transactions.
So, yeah, I just want to clarify that a little bit. So in Oklahoma, for example, just having so are we just speaking of just online sales?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, online
sales. I don't
sales.
have a physical store.
Yeah, selling to consumers in that state.
Right. So now how would that work exactly? Is there, let's say I sell $98,000 worth of stuff, I don't have to collect sales tax?
So I believe it's an average over a few months, and we can get those rules and make sure that they're on there, but you need to look up your individual states.
Do you have to go back then and charge people sales tax?
No, you just, once you meet the threshold, then you start having to collect sales tax for all future sales and moving forward.
Okay, so it would be an average over an annual period
or
over a particular period?
Yeah, or I think once you meet that threshold, then you have to apply for a sales tax permit and start doing it. Now, there are some businesses who still get away with it if they're right in that kind of level. Really, everybody just wanted the Temu money and the Amazon
and this kind of
Wayfair, that kind of stuff.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, this kind of goes back to in the old days before this. If you were doing interstate commerce, there was basically no federal sales tax, so
right.
You didn't charge people if you're shipping out of state.
Mm-hmm.
But with the advent of Amazon and other entities being able to sell so much into a state, across state lines basically, cities, towns, and states started losing out on that sales tax revenue. So
Yep.
less money spent at Target, more money spent at Amazon,
Correct.
Means less tax revenue.
Correct. Now, most of the small business people that we're dealing with are not going to have to worry too much about this because their sales are not going to be that much in one state. But if you grow and you do see quite a bit of sales from a particular area, you need to pay attention to what that threshold is.
Now, how would a small business owner know how do they, is this something that's in the accounting software generally these days?
Typically, it's in a POS system, so you should have reports for like certain states within your point of sale system or accounting software of some kind. If you sell on Amazon or something like that, they'll usually automatically do it. A lot of businesses too, like specific industry ones, will automatically collect the taxes that are relevant. So like my brother uses this software called OrderPort, which is specific for wine, and they know all of the right taxes to withhold in certain areas.
That was going to be my next question: is how do you know that whatever software you're using is up to date with all that? Like, are you liable, for example, to be dinged by another state for not collecting sales tax for their state?
Yeah, you can get dinged by states for not collecting the sales tax in that state if you are supposed to. If they say that you do have an economic or a physical nexus in that state, then you're going to have to start collecting sales tax.
And does it extend all the way to counties and cities? And
No,
towns?
so that's just per state. So if you sell, no matter how much it is in that state, it doesn't matter the county or city. So it's just in that state whether you have to have a sales tax permit. And then if you have to have a sales tax permit in that state, then you do have to pay attention to each city and county that you're selling in and collect those different sales tax. So like Oklahoma City has several different ones. You know, we have a county tax and then we have a city tax sometimes. So
now I know that whenever I used to do shows, the promoters would always hand us out the tax forms, and it was basically a voluntary thing. You filled out how much your sales were, and then you remitted to the promoter the amount that you declared that you sold.
Right.
And as far as I know, nobody that I know ever got checked on that. But I imagine that it was possible.
It very rarely do they check into that on the economic side unless you're a very large online business selling stuff. The more common test that you need to pay attention to is the physical nexus. So if you have a physical store that you're selling stuff out of that store, then you have to collect sales tax. So if you have a manufacturing shop or something like that where you're making stuff and then selling online, you don't need one unless you meet the economic threshold. But if you have a physical presence, like an actual retail store or an actual manufacturing facility here, then you have to collect sales tax.
Okay, well that's actually very important, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Especially in light of the court case that you said.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go, small business owners. Don't get caught because it could get expensive.
Yeah. So, and it is important to note too that if your business is here and you have a physical nexus like a shop that's manufacturing them here and then selling online, you still have to collect sales tax for the online sales for that state. So like a t-shirt shop, for example, that has like a warehouse, they don't have an actual retail storefront, but they're manufacturing that good, then they still have to collect the sales tax for sales done in Oklahoma.
So would you say that is that definitely something that someone should hire an accountant to look at?
If it's in a gray area, you should definitely talk to somebody who's in the know, an accountant or a consultant or something like that, if it's in a gray area. For sure, if you have a retail storefront, you have to have sales tax permit, no question there. If you're manufacturing and selling online in the state and you have a physical store or physical shop in the state, then you're supposed to collect sales tax. Now, if it's a couple transactions, mostly you're selling online and away, you're probably going to be able to skate by, but you should still get it if you're supposed to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
so that's sales tax permits. Next, I just want to mention kind of all the different things that you have to deal with. So as an example, you have Chester's, which is a bar and grill. It's a pool hall, and you also have a limited service restaurant where you just serve, some fried foods and burgers and stuff like that. It's not a full service restaurant. But your limited service restaurant, this is just a few of the main ones that you have to deal with. And so you have to deal with the ABLE Commission here in Oklahoma for your liquor license. Mm-hmm. And then you have to deal with the Oklahoma County Health Department for your health permit. Mm-hmm. Those are both renewed every year. Then you have to deal with the Oklahoma Tax Commission. We have to report your sales tax and your mixed beverage tax. And then we have to do withholding taxes and income taxes. And you have to report those. The sales tax and mixed beverage and withholding. Sales tax and mixed beverage are done monthly. Withholding is done quarterly. And then the income taxes once a year. And then you have to deal with the fire marshal for your certificate of occupancy. You have to deal with the city of Oklahoma City because you have to have a coin-operated amusement machine permit for your pool tables. Those are $9. You get little stickers every year. Yep. Then you have to deal with employment issues with the Oklahoma Employment Security Commission, which handles Oklahoma unemployment. The employee that you mentioned earlier who got terminated because of his license collected unemployment for a while against our company, so we had to deal with that. And then, of course, all the other federal labor laws and stuff, which is the OSHA, Department of Labor, and the EEOC that you have to deal with. And then finally the IRS. And those are most of them, but I'm sure I missed a couple that you have to deal with.
Well, yeah, I mean, so Oklahoma City, for example, you have the coin-operated machine permit that you have to do for the vending machines. Mm-hmm. But you also have to have a business license for Oklahoma City. You have to have a certificate of compliance for Oklahoma City that says that you have a liquor license. Yep. So you have to, and it's convoluted because you have to go get your liquor license, then you take your liquor license to Oklahoma City, but you have to actually print an ad in the paper. Yeah. To give the public basically notice that you're applying for this license, and then once you get that, then you get your certificate of compliance.
And there's a lot of things you have to do where you have to print those ads in the news. I don't get why we still do that in 2024, but it's still the rules some places.
It's the rules, and fire marshal, for example, certificate of occupancy is only one thing. You also have to make sure that all of your sprinklers, you have to get a tag for that. All of your fire extinguishers have to be up to date. Your fire suppression system, it's a lot.
Yeah, and if you don't properly plan...
Your grease traps have to be, compliant.
If you don't properly plan for all of these or you miss one, it can shut your whole business down, which almost happened to you on the liquer license for a little bit, didn't it?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, you hired the catering company to come in and do beer for a little while?
We did. We had to do that, which cost us more money for about 2 months. We paid more. Just to illustrate how much of a hassle that was, under the law, if you do that with a catering company, they have to remove all of the alcohol every night and bring it in every morning. Yeah. They can't leave it overnight in the building. Yeah. If you can imagine that, even if it's locked up.
Such a huge pain. The other important thing to kind of think about on all of these is when you're opening a new spot or you're doing your business plan is the timing, because you have to have some of these permits before they release other permits. So like you have to have a sales tax permit before you can get some of your other permits from the city. And like you said, you have to get your liquor license and then you get your certificate of compliance to show that you have it. So you need to plan out for when you're going to apply for these and when they're going to come inspect and when you're going to get them. Because some of these, like the health permit, you have to be pretty much done with your construction or at least working on it and submit the plans before they'll come out. And
as you explained earlier, there's a lot of marijuana related businesses that are everything's done except they don't have their certificate of occupancy. Yep. That's it. We had a situation where, let me see if I remember what I was going to say. I think I lost my train of thought there, but it was, the Oklahoma one was we couldn't get our business license from the city of Oklahoma until we had our ABLE license, and then with that we had to then print the advertisement, as I said. So there was that. And then there was one other thing that I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was...
We had such a hard time, too, getting your liquor license and your coin-operated machine ones renewed because our sales tax permit had the wrong name on it for a little while. We had the business name, the LLC name, and then we were using, DBA Chester's, but our sales tax permit just said our business name. It didn't have the DBA in there. So we had to get a whole new sales tax permit from the county, and they took forever to get that to us before we could even reapply for some of these. It's such a catch-22. It's a real hassle.
Oh, it can be, yeah. Earlier we were discussing, how difficult it would be to have some company that knows all these things for all these different permits for all the different businesses, and we said, well, it might not be impossible, but it would be incredibly impractical, but there are companies, for example, in Oklahoma City or Oklahoma that specialize in making sure that your business is compliant for liquor licenses.
Yeah.
That make sure that every single year it never expires.
Mm-hmm.
That all your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted.
Yep.
And for that, he charges anywhere from $500 to $5,000, depending on the size of your business.
Yep.
But the whole purpose of that is just so that the business owner, like myself, doesn't have to worry about what happened to me, where when it expires, now things are really much more difficult to renew it.
Yeah, and they have a lot of those for specific industries. So like that one for the liquor license. They also have ones for OMMA compliance to make sure that they're following all the medical marijuana authorities' rules. So there's a lot of industries out there, and definitely if you're doing something complicated like a restaurant that needs a lot of different permits, it's worth talking to a professional or hiring a consultant or even hiring those people just to handle the compliance. But that's just one part of it, just the liquor license. You have to get a whole nother company to make sure you're following the health permits and everything else.
So I think this would be an important point to say to people. Another resource that may be available are industry associations, like
Definitely.
the Oklahoma City Restaurant Association or the State Restaurant Association,
Mm-hmm.
or there are groups, trade groups that sometimes they're free, sometimes they require a small membership fee. But the bonus is that they have people that are working on those things. A lot of times they're also lobbying on the behalf of the industry to reduce the burden of some of the onerous regulations and some of the confusing ones that are hard to deal with.
Yeah, definitely important to attend those meetings. Sometimes they'll have meetings and stuff like that, or join those organizations. So those things can be very helpful.
As well, those organizations can be a great source of networking.
Yeah.
So, you can find out how other people have dealt with these things. But beyond that, you can just meet people and talk about general business things that could be very helpful to you.
Yeah, absolutely. During this step, the end goal is to kind of figure out what licenses and permits you need, but also you need to really look down at whether there's a barrier to entry on the licenses. So there are some licenses and permits that are just impossible to get, that you just won't be able to get. Like they only have so many. You told that story about the Airbnb in Vegas, I think the last time. Impossible. You were not getting a short-term rental license for your location because they were only doing so many.
Just to remind everyone, on that one, we had bought a house with the intention of turning it into an Airbnb for businesses like ourselves who
Mm-hmm.
had too many people, to make it affordable to get everybody hotel rooms for a 10-day stretch. So we bought a house with the idea of we can use it ourselves for the 2 months that we're there, not all in one stretch, but
yeah, a couple weeks here and there, and then
right.
Airbnb
And
at
then
the rest of the year.
the other times we would rent it out, and we endeavored to make it really business friendly. The house with the high speed internet, everything, conference room, table, that sort of thing. And just at random one night, we were coming in after a show, and the TV was on, and it was on to the local public access channel, and they were literally having a hearing about short-term rental licenses, and it just so happened that the people that were applying for the short-term rental license, they had made a law that said you could not have a short-term rental license in the county that I was in within, I believe it was 600 yards of any other short-term rental license. Now, at that point, we had not even known that we needed a short-term rental license.
Yeah, you just thought you could do it.
Yeah, I just thought Airbnb, it was no big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously that was a huge mistake on my part not to even check into that to see whether or not any licenses were required. And it turns out that before I bought the house, that approximately a year before, that ordinance had passed in the city or in the county. And these guys were Boy Scouts. I mean, they were literal, highly decorated military veteran, and I mean, just the most upstanding people you could imagine for this sort of thing. And the city councilman told him, he said, well, there's somebody that's, right near you within the 600-yard limit that already has a short-term rental license. And then the attorney speaks up for these gentlemen and he says, but that person is not using it and does not intend to use it. So basically that person applied for and got the license preemptively to stop anyone else within a 600-yard radius of getting a license, which also, by the way, would have included us.
Yeah.
So the next day I started calling around, and that was basically the consensus, is that, sorry, it's impossible. We don't even want to take your money.
Yeah, it's just a
as an
full
attorney.
stop.
Yeah.
It happens all the time with those different licenses. There's some counties and cities, too, that limit like the number of liquor licenses you can have. I've heard some of those things will go for millions in certain areas.
The city councilman literally said to the guy, he said, you should approach that person and try to buy their license.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know what that would have entailed, because I think the license is tied to a particular address, so that would have literally meant buy the house, I think.
No, I think those kind of licenses are transferable. So you can, like, if you have a liquor license in some of these counties that restrict them, I'm pretty sure you can transfer it to another one. Same thing for the short-term rental. You can transfer it to another location as long as it doesn't impede with somebody else's.
I would say that's probably possible, but I don't know.
Yeah.
It was the Las Vegas County, Clark County, I guess, out there that did that.
Yeah.
Interestingly, though, we would be allowed to rent to people if it were more than 30 days. So I could have a company come in, rent it, use it for 2 weeks, and then I couldn't rent it to anyone else until the 30-day period was over. That required no license.
Well,
so
there you
a little
go.
bit of a loophole there.
This podcast is brought to you by S&H Business Services. We are serving the OKC and greater Oklahoma area. We offer tax preparation, accounting, bookkeeping, and payroll services for small businesses and individuals. You can find us at shbusinessservices.com. Again, that's S&H Business Services, found at shbusinessservices.com. Well, what are we talking about next? What's our next segment? Is it shrinkflation?
Yeah, I think we were talking about that. Shrinkflation, yep. So,
so a few weeks ago we talked about inflation. Now we're talking about shrinkflation.
Well, shrinkflation is a form of inflation.
Right.
And that's basically has to do with when businesses will actually give you less for the same price.
Right. God dang, my voice broke there. Excuse me.
Now, I was mentioning, before we started the podcast, I mentioned that I had read a book at one point, and I believe that the title of the book was called The History of Packaging. We looked it up. We didn't find it right away, so I'll have to get back to the audience on that. But one of the points in the book was that very often you will see packaging that says something like new and improved, or better formula, or washes better. But what you'll see that in the big font on the package, but then what you won't see is the fact that on the actual amount of, let's say, soap, for example, right? You may have bought previously a 15-ounce box, now it's a 14.2-ounce box.
Yeah.
But when you multiply that over millions of boxes,
yeah, it cuts their costs down.
That adds to the bottom line, the profit, pretty good for the company. But you're attracted by the very attractive new and improved formula and not paying attention to the very small amount that you're getting, the lower amount of actual product that you're getting.
Well, I think it's undeniable that when you go into the store nowadays, you see similar products that have shrunk. The candy bars have gotten a little smaller, the boxes have gotten a little smaller, and I think they try to do that so they could keep the prices relatively the same. But I feel like not only did everything get smaller, but it also got a little more expensive.
Oh yeah, they do it both ways too. So
Yeah.
they raise the price and give you less.
Yeah.
And they try to justify it by telling you that whatever they're giving you is better. The one that drives me nuts that I'm always trying to figure out is when you go to buy toilet paper, and they're always like, these 6 rolls equals 32 rolls of the other brand or something.
Yeah, they always do that. It's like the double ply rolls or whatever. Yeah.
No, it's
four of these rolls equals 16 of this one.
I just can't imagine sometimes the the marketing meetings these guys must have, to try to figure this stuff out. I used to say, I for a brief time, I had a relationship with with a lady who worked at one of the telecoms, maybe AT&T or one of them, I don't know. But I used to joke with her a little bit, and I used to say that the mobile phone companies, they taught the devil how to write contracts.
Yeah.
Because I can't imagine, the depth of those meetings where they're like, okay, let's tweak it just a little bit this way and a little bit that way. And back in the day, they literally wanted you to go over your minutes. Now we don't really have that problem. It's most of these plans are unlimited minutes, unlimited data, and so on. But
well, they say unlimited data, but then they throttle you after you've
Yes.
gone past a couple deals. I always get these notices that like you've used 75% of your data, and then
Yep.
like your phone ends up slower. Yeah, it's
Oh yeah,
It's
like
ridiculous.
I said, they taught the devil how to write the contracts. There's always like whatever the big print gives you, the fine print takes away.
yeah.
And
Which is exactly what they do on the packaging you were talking
Exactly.
about. Yeah, they're just that little tiny, unit or weight or ounce or however much is there. It's a little bit lower.
or another
But
way to
it's a
look
new
at
formula.
it, right? Another way to look at it is whatever discount they give you in big font, they take it away in the fees, at
Yeah.
the bottom of the invoice.
Well, Chandler did a little research for us. He brought this little statistic up that says 46% across 33 countries say that they have noticed product sizes becoming smaller, but the price remaining the same in the past 6 months. So it's not just a U.S. problem. It's across, across the country.
It's an everywhere
across the
problem
world.
because this is, again, speaking of the history of packaging, the main emphasis on the history of packaging was basically an anthropological study. So they actually hired an
Anthropologist?
Thank you, an anthropologist. They actually hired an anthropologist to study the behavior of consumers. Okay, this was like an industry trade group or something that had hired them to study how do consumers behave from an anthropological standpoint, right? Like for example, when people go in a store, they almost always turn right. For example, they never turn left. So that's why a lot of times you'll see the stores laid out the way they are. Or milk is always in the back of the store, right? Not because it has to be stored in the back of the store because that's where the freezer are. It's stored in the back of the store because they want people to go through the store to get to the milk. Because what they've studied is that they will inevitably buy more things, if all they need is milk. If milk were just at the front, they would come in, buy their milk, and leave.
I always hear those comparisons about casinos, like because I'm kind of a degenerate gambler sometimes. They say that they design casinos specifically so that you'll kind of get lost. There's no clocks and windows and
That's
stuff, so that you
exactly
stay
why.
in there long. I wonder if there's some similar psychology to the layout of those in grocery stores.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah,
And
I never thought about that at grocery stores. That's amazing.
Right, and that's what it is. And so, for example, how big are the aisles? So one of the things is when you're browsing something, right? If someone gets too close to you, you'll move away. Instead, if you're pondering, right, to buy something,
Oh,
so the aisles are made exactly in a certain width, right? So that people don't feel pressured and don't feel people getting in their bubble.
I 100% do that. If the store has tighter aisles, I buy less.
Right, and that's exactly
I
right.
move faster.
And that's what this whole book was premised on. Is the person who did this is an anthropologist, and through the study that he did, that he was hired to do, he gathered enough data that he turned it into a book.
And that's the book, The History
And that's
of
the book.
Packaging.
I believe it's called The History of Packaging. I read it so long ago, and it's somewhere in boxes in some of my many moves. But now that we're talking about it, I'm going to look it up and try to get it and reread it. But it had such interesting insights, all based on the anthropological side of it.
All right. Well, maybe we'll have a future book review of
Yeah.
The History of Packaging. On the more research that Chandler did for us, which we're very appreciative of those people who were noticed that the sizes got smaller, it seems that they really targeted savory snacks like chips and crisps and pretzels. And I always thought that they were screwing you on the chip bags because it's like, you open it up and it's 90% air. Just a tiny little bit of chip down there.
That's exactly how they do it.
And I've recently been trying to lose some weight, and so I got some of that whey protein stuff. So you buy those huge, jugs of protein, and it's like half full. Yeah, I don't understand what they're doing there.
I don't
just
either.
putting less product in bigger packaging to make it seem.
Well, that itself is a standard practice, because the bigger they make it seem, people psychologically will associate a bigger package with more stuff.
Yeah, more value, you think?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And one of the things I cannot stand in my industry, for example, that I've noticed a trend is many years ago, I want to say, 25, 30 years ago, we started to sell these high-end pool cue tips, which were multi-layered tips.
Mm-hmm.
And those tips were, they, just to put this into contrast, the tips that people used before that, were literally like 50 tips to a box for $10 a box, right? And the new layered tips were like $10, $20, $30 a piece for these tips for one tip.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Okay, that's
so
way
it's
different.
A major jump, right?
Yeah.
And they used to sell these tips in tins, right? So you'd get like 10 tips in a tin or something like that, for $100 or something, right? Well, now I've noticed that a lot of these companies are selling individual single tips, okay? A small, tiny tip in a package this big. All that plastic is surrounding one single tip, and it just drives me crazy because I think it's such a waste. And it's not even necessarily set up for retail. Sometimes you'll have the retail packages where they'll just have a nice hanging display. That's part of it. But I think it's mainly because they want to try to make people feel like these tips are more valuable as a product by packaging it one at a time, almost like a little diamond or something.
From a small business owner perspective, do you think that that's the way to go? Because I'm kind of on the fence. I think you should be more transparent and honest when you're selling stuff. I feel like that helps with the longevity of a company. You don't need all that extra packaging.
No, I personally would be ashamed.
Yeah.
To sell tips in that manner, So I try to make sure that our packaging, everything we do is efficient. One thing we do is we sell pool cue cases with cloth bags that are called dust covers.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to do that because I didn't want to do plastic bags, because I think the plastic bags they're just worse for the environment naturally, and also people just throw them away. And dust covers actually have a use, So if you're storing your case, for example, you want to. I didn't know this, but there's actually a thing called dust mites.
Yeah. And
dust mites eat, and so they really can harm, the leather or the material over time. And so dust covers are something that is sold with high-end bags.
Mm-hmm.
And people that own high-end bags, they know how to use them when they store them in their closets or whatever. They actually use those dust covers. Well, my customers generally throw them away. So if I go to a show, for example, and I sell 200 cases, then I've got a big pile of bags, left over. So we'll try to reuse them. But I've always felt bad about that. I felt bad about the fact that we're making a bag that most people are just throwing away.
Mm-hmm.
But I do it because it's necessary for that. But if I can reduce that even further, I will do that. So we may end up going to a type of bag that's biodegradable or something like that. So I would feel even worse if I were just doing something for vanity or trying to trick people and make them feel like it's more valuable. For example,
Go ahead.
For example, I could create a box, that would present the case in a velvet liner and everything. So when they got it, they opened it up and there'd be that ah moment. But that box would be a complete waste. It would add to the cost. It would just end up in the landfill at some point. Some people would keep it, but most of the time it would be basically to play with people's heads to make them feel like that what I'm selling them is worth even more than what I'm charging them.
But you can't deny that it does work.
Oh, it works. Yeah, absolutely.
But I kind of feel like maybe there's a difference between what works on a mass market level and what works for kind of like a niche product. So I feel like if you're selling cases, you should be more transparent. You shouldn't do the little extras that cost way more for no reason. I feel like if you're only selling, a few hundred items a year of like a higher end thing in a niche market, you're going to get called out by those people that want to buy it. But then the things that go on grocery stores, maybe you do adopt some of those practices. I don't know.
I think it's a balancing test for
Yeah.
sure, but I would personally always fall on the idea that if it's done for no other reason than to mess with someone's mind and basically trick them into paying more for something, then I think it's wrong, personally. But there is no denying that it works. The advertising industry knows it. The marketing industry knows it. The psychological industry knows it. There are numerous studies that have been done, real world studies where the reason that things are marked at $9.99 instead of $10 is because anything marked with a 9 at the end of it is going to sell more than with a 0 at the end of it.
Yeah, I want to say that I don't fall for things like that, but I'm pretty gullible. So I'm for
Well,
sure a candidate for all that psychology. I grab the thing that looks nicer and new and improved. I'm all about it.
let me just put it this way. So we're talking about small businesses here. So obviously we aren't participating in in that research.
Hmm.
But corporations, the Fortune 500, they spend tens of millions to hundreds of millions of dollars every year just to figure out the psychology of consumers, like why consumers choose what they do, and they tailor all of their packaging and all of their marketing towards manipulating consumers in the directions that they've identified that consumers are likely to be manipulated into.
Yeah.
And we are all susceptible to it.
Yeah. Well, one of the other things that Chandler had mentioned that I had never heard of before was skimpflation, where they change some ingredients or they give you a lesser quality product for the same price rather than shrink it. And you might not even notice. It might be kind of a subtle difference, but it's not quite as good. So replacing, watering things down a little bit, replacing certain oils with a cheaper, seed oil. I've never actually even thought about it, but I'm sure it happens all the time.
So in my industry, for example, we often hear about pool cues, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So the way to make a really, really solid, good hitting pool cue traditionally has been to cut the wood very slowly. You let it warp, and then you cut that out, and you just keep doing that until you've got a core left that is unlikely to move in most climate situations, most environmental situations. So what cue makers have experimented with over the years is basically using chemicals to harden the wood, which changes the way the cue feels. And they've experimented with using less wood and other materials like, say, carbon fiber or plastic rod, things like that. And that can change the feel, it can change the balance, it can change the quality of the cue, how it responds to different environments.
Yeah.
But all of that is in service to more or less being able to spend less money making the pool cue while still being able to charge the same or more. Because in some cases they will even say, this is a new and improved technology, right, that will make the cue better, when it actually doesn't make the cue better, but marketing. But when you look at the actual cost to make the cue, what they've done is reduce that cost significantly without a corresponding reduction in retail price.
That's fair enough. Okay. So they just add some like filler or different ways to do it to make it work out, right? Like
Yeah,
the
so for
cues.
example, they may do a sleeve of plastic, that looks like wood,
Oh, I gotcha.
or decals instead of actual inlays.
Yeah. Well, sometimes business owners might find themselves in a situation where they have to do something like that just because of the availability of certain products, or it gets cheaper. You have to change the way you make things. So sometimes you end up having to skimp. So there's the famous Oklahoma one that we talk about all the time is the onion burger, right? You were telling us about that.
Right. That was, as I understand it, that was during the Depression era,
Mm-hmm.
when meat was very expensive and people didn't have very much income. So what they ended up doing was they would chop up onions and mix it into the meat as a filler.
Yeah, to stretch it.
And then basically they'd be able to stretch it out. And so that became known as the onion burger. So around town in Oklahoma City, you'll see different places advertising that they have onion burgers because it became such a staple here. Now, these days, a lot of those places will serve basically a burger with a lot of chopped up onions that have been sautéed, and those are very tasty, but they're not the original onion burger. The original onion burger was, as I said, using meat as a filler.
Mm-hmm.
Now, famously, right, if we go back to a corporate kind of thing with that, is remember when I'm not even going to mention the name, but you guys can look it up because I don't want to get us in trouble on this podcast. But one of the famous fast food brands out there was dinged once upon a time for putting what was called meat slime into their burger meat, so that it was basically, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was basically kind of like the parts of the beef that most people wouldn't eat, and they would just grind it up and kind of use it as filler.
Yep. Yeah.
And that was a big thing for a while, and it actually became the basis, for example, of another competing fast food one to say, to have the old "Where's the beef?" Advertisement. You remember that? That was Wendy's.
Yeah.
They would advertise that their hamburgers were pure beef and they were fresh and they were big,
Mm-hmm.
and it was all real beef, right? And so that's why they said, they had a lot of success with that, in comparison to these other fast food brands that were using a lot of filler.
One of the ones that kind of screwed me up on the skimpflation was this ice cream brand that we used to like. Apparently, it's not even really ice cream. They can't call it ice cream because they switched their formula to have these fillers, and so there's not enough dairy product in it to be considered ice cream.
Wow.
So it's now called the frozen dairy dessert or something like that.
Isn't that crazy?
So you got to pay attention to those labels and stuff. But I think if these companies were more transparent in their overall message and what they were doing, like, I probably respect it more, but I don't know if I'd buy it more. So I don't know the psychology behind that. I think if they were honest about it, I'd be like, well, good on you for being honest. But
well, the statistic that we're looking at right here says consumers have a little appetite for shrinkflation. It says 48% of respondents say, on average across 33 countries, say it's unacceptable for businesses and retailers to reduce the size of their products while keeping prices the same as a way of responding to rising costs.
So what do you think the ultimate solution to shrinkflation is? Should they just raise their price and keep everything the same?
So, yeah, I think so. I think that rather than tricking people, they should just be transparent and say, our costs are up, we have to raise our price,
I completely agree with you. I think just raise the price to whatever it needs to be, but stop screwing around.
It becomes difficult, though. It depends on how they do their pricing. And one of the things is that that when you finally settle on pricing, then usually you have a whole host of issues that go along with that. If you're a restaurant, for example, you might have printed menus. And you might have spent a lot of money on printing your menus. And now if you find, 3 months later that you really do need to raise your prices, now you're stuck with the thought of printing new menus, for example, or looking bad, for example, if you more or less just go through and use whiteout or something to change
I've
your
seen
prices.
that at the Chinese restaurant. They just scratch it out and write.
And that's why a lot of times you'll see the menus these days will not be the nice printed menus. They'll just be the ones where you kind of slip paper into it, so you've got the ability to change.
Yeah, or the QR codes. I like the QR codes.
QR codes work because nowadays that's something where I was like resistant to it at first with the QR. You go into a restaurant and they're like, we don't have a menu, just use our QR code, and then you got to look at it on your phone.
Yeah.
I was resistant to it at first, but now I'm kind of used to it, and I'm okay with it because it does allow people to have the flexibility to do a lot of things that they wouldn't be able to do with printed menus. But yes, in general, my thought is that the more transparent you are with your customers, the more honest you are with your customers, the more the customers actually appreciate it. Now, having said that, I went into a restaurant here in Oklahoma City, and this restaurant is very, very political. I mean, the outside of their restaurant is all about, supporting one side over the other.
Oh, there's a place here in Oklahoma that burns Trump into the burger top. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't seen
that.
Yeah,
it's like
yet.
Little Mike's.
Oh, they do
like
that now. That's actually the place that I'm talking
they're
about.
They're big about Trump. They like him.
But here's the thing, right? So I went in there, and on every table they've got like a little note card that says, we've had to raise our, because of the current administration, and everything. They blame the current administration for inflation, which people can argue back and forth about what the reasons why inflation happens and what effect the government has on it or not. Economists, well-respected Nobel Prize-winning economists, argue about this, and can't come to a conclusion amongst all of them as to what exactly causes inflation. But the thing that bothered me, though, when I went in there was they had it on there. They were blaming the government. They were saying, my mayonnaise costs have gone up this much, beef costs have gone up, and just basically justifying why that the price of their burgers had gone up. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, while I was waiting on my order, I thought, let me just look some of this stuff up, and I'll just and I'm not going to give an exact example because I can't really remember it, but let's just say, for example, that pickles were on this list and said that the pickles have gone up 57%, and I thought to myself, wow, that just doesn't sound right. And I looked it up, and sure enough, pickles had gone up 57%.
Yeah.
So whether or not they were right or wrong about who caused the inflation, they were being very transparent about the fact that their costs had gone up, and it was apparently verifiable. So I couldn't, whether or not I agree with the politics of the place, I could not disagree with the fact that they were stating very clearly, this is why our prices are where they are, and being honest about it.
You gotta respect that. This podcast is brought to you by S&H Business Services. We are serving the OKC and greater Oklahoma area. We offer tax preparation, accounting, bookkeeping, and payroll services for small businesses and individuals. You can find us at shbusinessservices.com. Again, that's S&H Business Services, found at shbusinessservices.com. You don't want to be caught in a lie. Losing credibility destroys small businesses.
And I think that is probably a good segue into our next segment here, which is we were going to talk about scams a little bit more.
Yeah. Do you have a good story about scams, or you want me to start it off?
I think you should start this one off.
So the one scam that I want to bring to everyone's attention, and I don't know if it happens in every state, but I'm pretty positive it does. In Oklahoma, whenever you register for an LLC, you're going to get about 3 letters in the mail. And each one is going to tell you some extra thing that you need, or else you're going to be subject to all these fines and penalties. And if you read the fine print, it says that they're not affiliated with any state office. This is completely a solicitation. We just want your money. And one of the more common ones, and a lot of people unfortunately have fallen for it, is they'll register an LLC with the Secretary of State. They'll get a letter and they'll say $150 for your LLC certificate. And all that is your certificate that you got in an email already, printed off in a cheap little $2 frame, and they send it to you to put on your wall. And it's absolutely not needed. It is completely a scam.
Do you think that people should be allowed to use public records to do those things?
That's a tricky question. I lean towards absolutely not, but in certain circumstances it's okay. I have used public records myself to solicit clients. We pulled the lien list for people who had IRS debt, and we sent them out letters. We were not very successful in our mailing campaign, but I know other firms have been successful in that. So I don't know. I don't want to be a hypocrite and say no. I have definitely used public information to solicit clients.
So with that example that you said, in my opinion, you're offering a service, like a good service.
Yeah.
You're offering to help someone with a situation.
Mm-hmm.
In the scam situation where you said, they're basically offering a thing that is not necessary.
Yep.
That to me is like leeching off of society. It's leeching off the public trust, right? Because the public trust is, we have a list of all these people who've started businesses. This is part of the public record, so that the government is being transparent with people, right? And I feel like that it should be actually not allowed, or it should be criminal to offer things to people that they really don't need, in that sense, in a trickery sort of way, which that's how it feels to me.
Right.
And then it goes beyond that, though, is when they send letters telling people that they're going to be in trouble. They're going to be, if they're not in compliance. Going back to what we talked about licenses. Then there's people who will use that to tell you that you're going to be in trouble if you don't have this compliance or this license or that license, and then they'll offer you a service that is completely unnecessary. And people will get scared and pay it because they're ignorant. They don't know.
Yeah, one of the ones that comes through our office often, and it's the saddest thing to see, but people will get a little bit behind in their tax debt, and they'll get a phone call saying, we know how much you owe to the IRS. It's, several thousand, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and if you don't pay today, you're going to jail. So you have to pay it right this second. And some people will say, well, I can't pay the full amount. I could pay a little bit less. Like, if I pay that, are we okay? And they're like, that'll be acceptable. We'll wipe your tax debt clean for, 10%, which may be like $10,000 or $20,000. They'll pay it, and then that's it. It's just a scam. They stole the money. And so the IRS, you still owe the money to the IRS, and the IRS won't even let you write that loss off on your taxes for being scammed.
That's crazy that the IRS won't let you write scams off.
It's a horrible situation. So another kind of tidbit I'll give here, a turtle tip, if you will, is that the IRS will not call you unless you're expecting a phone call. You won't just get a call out of the blue from the IRS. They send letters, or IRS agents will show up, but they won't call you demanding you pay right then or you're going to jail.
So just a reminder to everyone, on our website, we will have fairly extensive resources to try to help you to identify scams. We will have phone numbers, the relevant phone numbers for you to be able to report scams, including reporting to the FBI. Sometimes it can feel hopeless, like, okay, you got scammed and nobody's there to help you. And a lot of times there won't be a way to recover anything.
Yeah, there's generally very little recourse. So the best thing you can do is just be aware and preventative.
That's right. Be aware and be preventative, but also be part of helping other people avoid them.
Yeah, particularly older people and stuff like that. They really get scammed because they just, they get confused, or they don't understand, or, the world's moved pretty fast. So
my mom gets a lot of these scummy letters all the time like that. It's just so much, and things can look so official.
Yeah.
So just be careful out there. Business people are especially susceptible targets because a lot of our information is public information.
As soon as you register for an LLC, like I said, you'll start getting those scam letters almost immediately.
Yeah.
So just
one that we went through the other day was a trademark, right? Remember,
Mm-hmm.
someone sent me a letter and said, so-and-so, is filing for this trademark, and if you don't want to lose access to your trademark, which is, they're basically saying that they represented another company that wanted the trademark.
Yeah.
Which was absolutely not true.
Yep.
They were just trying to pressure me into hiring them to
secure your trademark.
to secure the trademark.
Yeah, it's just scummy.
And it just means, at the very least, if you get a little scared, you're taking away your time. What did I spend? A couple hours on that because
Yeah.
I had to ask Tiffany, and I had to talk about it and try to do some research. And, so 3 people get involved on this.
Yeah. And then we talked to a real, a
And then
trademark
we ended up
attorney.
talking to a real attorney,
So
and that cost money. So as I said, we're going to attempt to do as much as we can to try to help Turtlesmith users, members, to avoid these scams. We're going to identify them, give you all the resources you need, and just say be careful out there.
Yeah. And we hope you as the community help us identify a bunch as well.
Right.
So you have a good story about scams, or is that sort of the...
Well, I don't know. Was there one that I said before that was
Have you ever been the victim of a scam?
Oh yeah. Several times. One was a lot of this happens on Facebook, for example. Where there will be products that are too good to be true. And even as much as I know about that, one was a lathe, for example. Someone, and I didn't get scammed on this because I was able to think it through.
Mm-hmm.
But I was moments away from sending the money, and it was about $800 for a lathe that would normally cost about $2,000.
Yeah.
So it would have been a significant savings. But luckily, just something at the last moment told me, you better double check this. And so the person said they were in Houston. So I happened to know a bunch of people in Houston, especially a couple cue makers. And I said to him, well, I'd like to have my friend come and check it out. Where can he meet you?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then that was the end of the conversation because obviously they weren't in Houston.
Yeah. The one that got me was in Vegas after a few beers, maybe more than a few, but when we got the bottle service, and this guy hit us up. He's like, $100 or $150 for the bottle service, and we'll take you to the club. But then the limo picks you up, and you got to pay the limo $150. Then you get to the door, and it's really you got to pay them $150. Then you get to the table, and you got to pay them $150, and then you're at a club where there's nobody there. And you get a watered down bottle of vodka for $450.
I actually do have a story about that, similar to that,
Yeah.
way back in the day when I was very newly in the business.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to London. I was living in Germany, and I went to London for an amusement show.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had video games and all that, but they also had a billiard section.
Yeah.
So I went there as a visitor to just go check it out because back then I was interested in all the shows that were pertaining to my industry. And I went into a place in downtown London, and I'm trying to think of it's a particular part of London, that's famous for the strip clubs and everything like that. And I remember somebody inviting me into one of those places, come see a live show, and I'm just 24 years old or something, and we get in there, and it's me and some guy from Spain are sitting there, and the girls were asking us to buy them drinks, and I was at least savvy enough to know at that point not to buy into the buying them drinks, so I just got myself a Coke and something like that. And the Spanish guy had bought a couple drinks. Meanwhile, we're sitting there and no show is happening, right? We're just watching an empty stage, right? And eventually we get up to leave, and he goes off one direction, I go off the other, and these 2 guys, giant guys, appear right beside me. And they say, hey, before you leave, you need to settle up your bill. And I was like, what bill? Because I paid for a Coke. I just paid for it, right? It was like $10 or something, which was still ridiculous.
Ludicrous.
But they charged me $1,200. They produced a fake invoice, and I had to go to the ATM, several ATMs, and use up all the cards that I had and produce the equivalent of $1,200. And then I had to turn around and explain that to my partners when I went back.
Yeah.
And, I tried to make a joke about it. I was like, I got fucked and didn't have to take my clothes off. But that was a pretty bad experience.
Yeah.
On that one. So yes, I've had a similar experience getting fleeced like that. And that has been a big reason why I stay, as much as possible, I just stay away from the strip clubs and places like that.
Yeah. Not for me anymore either. So.
Yeah,
Well, I think that's it for this week, man.
I think we're good.
All
So be safe out there, like we
Yeah,
said.
stay
and,
vigilant. Try not to get scammed.
Make sure that that you're in full compliance and you've got all your licenses up, because worse than getting scammed is going to be losing your business for not taking care of your licenses.
Yeah, absolutely.
So y'all have a good one, and Scott, I'll see you next week.
Sounds good.